Senator Bell?
Mr. Chairman, I'm getting kind of confused because I keep hearing about the $10 billion. Where is the $10 billion? It appears to me we need to really get down to understanding the balances in the general fund. So I'd like to know just what's the projected balance in the general fund over the next several years. Is there $10 billion? And if there's less than $10 billion in the balance, does that mean we're going to have to cut stuff out of the budget to get the $10 billion? Is the Medi-Cal program going to cut more to get money? Is that what we're talking about? You know, or is this some kind of Easter egg hunt? So I like to ask the question. Maybe our budget committee people can talk about it, but what I'd like to do is get like a statement that shows what the real balance in the general fund is over in the future. Like if we can get, here's the balance, here's the real balance based on the Department of Finance estimates, here's what they estimate we're going to be looking at down the road, not spending any new programs, not adding anything to the budget. Is there $10 billion there? So, you know, because that seems to be the basis for our discussion here. And I like to know where that $10 billion is. Is it somewhere that I don't know?
Is there someone from the Department of Finance could maybe answer that? Thank you.
Good morning, Adam Dorsey, Department of Finance. So every year with the enacted budget, we produce a multi-year estimate that accounts for all of the expected revenues and expenditures. And so we just recently passed a budget. There are no updates to the projections that were made at the enactment of the Budget Act. And so we do have a multi-year projection. It is in balance. There is not a large balance. And in fact, we have some out years that are very difficult to balance. Taking $1 billion out of the Medi-Cal program would create some serious problems with the state.
Well, can you give us that information? I'm looking at, like, from a policy standpoint, like, are there?
Yep.
Can you look at that? And then this last year, how much money did we spend? An extra $10 billion? Was there $10 billion extra spent in this last year's budget? I don't think I'm aware of that, Mr. Chairman. Maybe Mr. Leno, he's the chairman of our committee.
I did just want to confirm, if I may.
Yeah, would Senator Leno, and then I believe Senator Mitchell will have a question. But go ahead if you want to confirm.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senator Nielsen did touch on this, but I think it needs to be restated that after the mandates of Proposition 98 and Proposition 2, and as the compromise budget that we passed and that was signed reflected paying down debt. After that, there was not 10 billion, there wasn't 1 billion, there was barely 100 million. And
100 million?
The reinvestments that we were able to agree upon in the compromise came from repurposing of other dollars that was not out of any kind of additional revenue. For example, there was the federal CHIP money that we put to use. We repurposed some of the middle-class scholarship for higher education reinvestments, but there just isn't money. So if we're triggering anything, it's really triggering money that's not there. And that's just how I see it, but I'd be happy to have finance respond.
I could not have said it any better.
Can you get us the information in writing for us? Because I think when my committee, I'm hearing this $10 billion thing too. I don't know where it is. I can't relate to it. I mean, what are we talking about here? So I'd like to know what the projected balance in the general fund is over the next, say, several years. How far do you go out?
We do a current year, updated current year, budget year, and then 3 out years. So it's a 5-year projection.
So you do a 5-year? Mm-hmm. You don't go further than that then, huh?
No.
Okay. Because you can't, you know, it becomes netherworld, right? Out there
harder and harder the farther you out.
All right,
you go,
all right.
yeah.
So I'd like to know, can you get us that information? It would help. I think it would help us in this committee, but also in the reality sense, help us in the other committees that are working on the special session. So thank you.
Thank you. I believe Senator Mitchell had a question.
Mine's on a different, slightly different issue. Ms. Kent, you mentioned modeling, can you share, is it too early? Can you share at all in detail what some of those other options may look like? And I'm assuming that they will meet the federal requirements that are outlined in our background paper, so we're not kind of at the drawing board again in terms of being out of compliance. So can you talk about some of the modeling you're looking at, just so we know what some of all of the options are that are potentially on the table?
Yeah, I mean, so when we say model, it sounds a lot more exciting than what it is. It's an Excel spreadsheet that just has all the plans on it, and depending on what we are looking at, if we're looking at enrollment numbers, if we're looking at premiums, so you just...
It's not a different kind of algorithm, if you will, beyond the tiered. It's just looking at tweaking the tiers versus a whole new kind of concept.
Yeah, we've played with tiers, we've added tiers, we've subtracted tiers, we've done it off of revenues and premiums and enrollment, and so any kind of configuration that we have thought or that the plans have suggested, we have modeled, but it's not...
it's not drastically different than the tiering concept.
Right, and
okay.
Of course, that's always the first thing that we do is we look and make sure that it meets the federal tests, obviously. So there have been certain suggestions or alternatives that have been considered, but you can't get around some of the statistical issues, and so then we have to go to something different.
All right, thank you.
Yes, Senator Morrell.
Yeah, I just want to try to bring some clarity to Senator Bell. There's two issues. There's anticipated revenues, and then there's the $10 billion that came in last year, correct? So in other words, he's asking about the anticipated, but my comment was about last year. And so there were, from my understanding, approximately $10 billion that came over and above. So we want to clear that for the senator. And then also, where did some of that money go?
So under the Constitution, there are certain guarantees that the voters have sort of, imposed on the state government in terms of how money is spent, and Prop 98 is sort of the most significant, and particularly the last 2 years. We've, and I am not an expert in the education world in any respect, but a lot of the revenue, the additional revenue that has come in, as my understanding, has been obligated to school funding under Proposition 98.
Not all of it went to school bonding schools, correct?
No, not all. No, that's right.
So I think it was a combination of school, Prop 2, and if I'm not mistaken, I think like over about 90% of that $10 billion was going to go to education or those particular entities. So there was not a lot of discretionary money available.
Paybacks of loans.
And to pay back to the schools, et cetera.
Yeah. So we'll get that information, Mr. Chairman. I think that you can see that we need that information. Thank you.
I'd like to thank, I'm going to make a comment. Oh, you have a question? Go ahead, Senator Pan, then I have a comment.
Thank you.
Maybe some questions.
Just for a historical basis, the original managed care tag, before even the one we have now, that we're in now, was actually, it was a, can you describe it as a tax that actually matched healthy families' money?
Correct, so there've been three.
Right.
The one that and this is based off of my memory, there was one that was allowed via federal law. It was at 5.5%, and then Congress changed the law, and we were forced to sunset that revenue starting in 2007, 2008. And then when we were in severe budget issues in 2008, 2009, we took that existing managed care tax, and we kind of we changed it into a gross premiums tax. And so we essentially said to Medicaid managed care plans, you will pay the gross premiums tax the way that every other insured entity in California is. So we'll treat you the same as everybody else that is taxed under the Constitution, which is 2.35%. And so we did that. The federal government at that point, I think, knew what we were doing, and they chose not to do anything about it.
Okay.
And then in 2000, I think it was 11, 12, we moved that tax from a gross premiums tax at 2.35% to the state-based portion of the sales tax, and imposed that on the same plans, which is a slightly higher rate, which is how the revenue was increased. Obviously, Medi-Cal both increased in size as well as in premiums, and so you had that sales tax in place, which is what is in place today. So there's been 3 different taxes over the years.
And just to clarify, that gross premiums tax, because you said you now added the other commercial plans are paying the gross premium tax?
So the gross premiums tax is imposed through the California Department of Insurance. It's a constitutionally based tax, and so if you are regulated and overseen by the Department of Insurance, then you pay that tax. So when we did that middle tax, those Medicaid plans were paying taxes to, or CDI was collecting the tax for them, even though they did not regulate or oversee them. It was just a taxing structure. And then that has since obviously been terminated, and plans are now paying the sales tax.
Okay, so there's no gross premium tax anymore.
No.
Everybody was
Unless you were
over.
regulated by CDI as a commercial health plan, you would pay the gross premiums tax, but Medicaid plans, because they don't, they're not licensed or overseen by CDI, they don't pay it anymore.
So currently, commercial plans that are regulated by CDI, do they pay gross premiums tax?
Yes.
Okay, all right, but they're the only ones paying it right now?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I have a comment, and from that comment may come a question. I mean, ideally, in the future, it'd be great if the economy just is booming and we have billions and billions of dollars of additional revenue. If that were the case, and we have constitutional obligations that we have to meet, Prop 98, rainy day fund, et cetera, and then whatever's left, then it's upon the legislature to determine how that money is going to be spent. And I'd love to see it spent, obviously, in healthcare, poor, DD, et cetera. So, but that still doesn't deal with a question that's at hand, and that's the MCO tax. The MCO tax is a tax that, as you mentioned, started in various iterations back in 08, 07, et cetera, with bipartisan support, with Republican support. The only difference is this time around the feds are changing the rules slightly. But let's keep in mind that if we do not pass that MCO tax with or without additional revenues coming in, that's that much less money coming into the general fund, that if we have good times, that we're going to have to use that money to fill in this hole. So I believe it is extremely important that we deal with the MCO tax. We deal it with this year, but there's another factor that we're failing to realize and that we're failing to have a discussion. We're drawing down federal money. And if we don't pass the MCO tax, we're going to leave federal dollars on the table. And to me, that is something that we cannot do. And I believe that the administration is working very, very hard at it. The plans really want to see this come to fruition. I've been talking with the plans, and the plans definitely want to have some kind of resolution. And so I believe there is a mechanism and I'm optimistic as well. So the other comment I'd like to make, and I believe we are comparing the tiered to the flat, and my understanding is with the tiered, we draw down more federal dollars. Is that correct? I think there's more money that comes in the state as opposed to the flat.
That's correct.
Okay. So I guess the question I would have for you, does the administration prefer one over the other? And I would assume they would prefer a tiered over a flat tax. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know that we stated as a clear preference. I think that we had a couple of principles that we were honing to when we set forth the proposal in January, which is, find the source that both, backfills the loss of the MCO tax as well as helps address the IHSS reduction of 7%. So that was we had to meet a dollar amount. We tried as much as possible to mitigate the impact on plans that are not Medi-Cal participants. So that was, again, why we did the tiering. And then we took an overall approach of not, violating any of the federal tests. And so those were the 3 things that we had to hone to. I don't know that we have a preference if we meet the other goals, but I think that that's where the flat tax is challenged in terms of we were really trying to minimize the impact to the commercial side of the market as much as possible.
Right. So I guess it's just one last closing comment, and I think it kind of follows up on what I think Senator Pan, or Senator Leno may have made this earlier as well. But with a third of the population now in Medi-Cal, and should we not, as policymakers, start even considering to requiring all health plans to take Medi-Cal? I mean, it's just an open question. Or to participate in Medi-Cal?
Well, I think that's a great policy question. I think it would require both a change to the markets that we have. The way we have the models set up, as I said, in terms of the GMC2 plan and county organized health system, I mean, that's a much larger discussion. If you wanted to say all plans have to participate, as you would actually have to change a lot of the ways that we actually deliver service today. And so that's a much larger discussion, and especially for $1 billion, I think that's a far larger both financial and programmatic impact, and you have to ask whether that's something that you really want to have done.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate the comments and your time for both of you to be up here. We're going to move on to...
Mr. Chair, I had a quick question. As we're looking at this, some people have reported that while it may be a small increase for some of the insurance companies, for other insurance companies, the tiered approach may result in a very hefty fee per insuree. Like a family of 4, it could be as much as a $1,200 increase. So you have 2 insurance companies offering the same product in benefits, but one is paying an extra $1,200 for that same product. How can we possibly, when we're looking at it, we're looking at the revenue, but how can we pick winners and losers among those corporations, those insurers?
Well, and that gets back to the discussion that when I was thinking through Senator Leno's question earlier, is it really depends on the product and business makeup of each plan. So if you are essentially a small regional plan that's all you do is small group, then yes, there's, that tax will have direct ramifications onto the purchasers within that market share. If you're a small regional plan that has some small group, but you also take Medicaid, then a portion of your tax is regenerated through Medicaid, so you don't have to have 100% pass through. And so depending on the plan and the type of business lines that you have, that's where we were trying as much as possible to minimize the impact to those non-Medicaid plans, which is why you see the grouping of the tier so much in kind of that mid-level enrollment, because as you saw from the presentation earlier, most of our Medi-Cal managed care plans are somewhere between 150 to, 400,000 or 500,000 lives. And so we were really trying to drive as much of the tax, which is why it's so much higher in that area, because those are Medi-Cal plans that are going to be returning that money back in through our rate structure.
I certainly understand the importance of the MCO tax and delivering on our promises to Medi-Cal. We, over the last year, with our Children's Health Insurance Program, the CHIP program, the feds gave us a whole different ratio, and we ended up with a windfall of, I think, in excess of $300 million. And that money was taken and put into the general fund. Why wouldn't that money responsibly go back to that population of Medi-Cal so that our burden on the MCO tax wouldn't be nearly as high? Now, I get that this is a drawdown of federal funds, but when we have something that's focused on that community, and then to put it into the general fund and not provide, and then turn around and say, well, we're not sure we're going to have enough money to provide for these people, that seems odd at best and disingenuous.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what's the governor's thoughts? And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but what's the governor's thoughts of how we can move that money out? And I get it, the money's fungible, but those people aren't fungible.
So, and I'll let Adam say something as well, but again, we have our budget that was approved this year is approximately $18 billion in general fund. So, and we have 12.5 million lives. We have 5 million children within Medi-Cal. Anything that comes to the general fund that is health related in certain cases is, even if it's general fund, it's not necessarily sequestered and set aside. So when we have general fund that we need in terms of a CHIP enhancement or something, it literally just goes back into supporting the overall operation of the program. We don't necessarily always see it as a new source of income that requires a new expenditure. And I may not be explaining it in the right way, but that CHIP enhancement, obviously really helpful in the overall support of the program, but we still have ongoing programmatic and financial requirements to providing premiums for these children, to supporting the overall benefit structure. And so that money just continues to go into the operation of the program and is not necessarily seen as a new amount of money that is used for something different.
Well, I wasn't thinking about something different. I was thinking about serving that population as opposed to going to the general fund. I'm sorry, sir. Did you have a response?
No, I thought that was an excellent description. I mean, I think the alternative to the way that it worked out in the budget agreement would be that you would have to, use that money for, some purpose in the Medicaid program, and so you'd sequester that money and set it aside and spend it on something, and then you'd have a $385 million general fund hole that you'd have to figure out how to cut or, to address, and whether that would be reductions or whatever.
But this is revenue that wasn't in the general fund to start with. This was a windfall that we didn't anticipate. No one said, oh, we're going to plot for this $300+ million. It just happened to be the feds were very generous with us with the formula. I find it difficult that we're now taking that money, putting it in the general fund, and we're not servicing this population when we know that we have this problem with the MCO. And it would be a lot easier to have this MCO debate if I didn't think that Peter was going to rob Paul. So, in a sense. So, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I believe Senator Leno, you had a final comment?
One last question for Director Kent. The administration has estimated that the proposed tax would raise about $1.7 billion, correct? And then you had already mentioned that the Medi-Cal MCOs would receive about $1.1 billion back, and that the net liability of the MCOs would be about $660 million. You would also, I think, put a number on the overall size of the MCO market. Was it something like $60 billion?
So in our total fund budget, when you take both our general fund contribution as well as the drawdown of the federal financial participation, as well as the 100% FFP that we get for the optional expansion population, I think we roughly spend about $60 billion in managed care payments in a year.
And so, thank you for helping me with this. I'm trying to put that $660 million liability in a context of $60 billion. This is about a 1% hit to it.
I don't think it's equivalent, if only because the 660 may or may not be assessed on full Medi-Cal managed care business. So that amount of money that we are looking to fill is assessed on plans that go beyond the Medi-Cal budget. So it's not necessarily a component of.
I'm just trying to get a perspective on how impactful is that $660 million net liability.
So that is the amount of revenue that we have to, that when you look at the broad-based tax, that's the amount that is being essentially spread across those other Medi-Cal managed care payers, because we've already paid back the Medi-Cal managed care plans that have paid the tax.
Right.
So that 660 is really on the plans that are not otherwise participating.
And that is the $60 billion?
No, the $60 billion is just Medi-Cal. That's a total fund for our budget as we spend it. So Medi-Cal.
Can we put a number on the universe of MCOs that are non-Medi-Cal?
Yeah, I'd have to look at what the total amount of premium is received by managed care in California annually, and then there would be a comparison that we could certainly work to provide.
Could you even take a stab at it now?
Oh, no.
Okay.
No.
Is it as large as 50, 60 billion?
I would say so, especially when you consider if we have 12.5 million in Medi-Cal, and we have a third of the state's population, and you would assume that there's probably 21, 22 million covered lives outside of Medi-Cal.
That are in managed care.
That are in managed care. Yeah, there's.
Okay.
The
reason I ask this is, and then what my mind wants to do is then extrapolate just a little further. So for purposes of this conversation, only not claiming that it's an accurate number, but let's say it is 60 billion because it's a nice round number. And so if it is, then it's about a 1% hit to that universe of MCO premiums.
Correct.
Could we then imagine that if it is a 1% hit, that for those who are paying premiums, that it might impact them about 1%? Or impact their premiums 1%?
I don't think it's that elegant.
Okay. This
Again,
is a simple mind asking a simple question.
Right,
I want it to be simple.
I would love there to be an easy, I would like to say yes, but I think
Okay.
that, again, it depends on, plans have a choice as to whether they would pass that through or not, or
Right,
how
of
they would
course.
pass it through. And so I think to say, you know, a 1% would mean that everybody pays a 1% really presupposes that the plans would pass it down, that they would pass it down in an equivalent basis, that it would be depending on a large group versus a small group versus an individual product. I mean, I think that there's just a lot of other factors that determine how that percentage increase would be handled. And so I don't think it's as easy as that.
Okay. And I don't want to suggest it's other than the way you've just described it, but if it's on average a 1% hit to the marketplace, it would be, and I know there are these other factors, but let's say a monthly premium of $400. That 1% is a pretty minimal hit to the consumer. And that's what we're trying to get to, is how impactful is this MCO tax that we're making the point is going to be $1 billion hit to the general fund if we don't do something. And if we have to do it and it's not as neat as it was before the feds changed their rules, but if it were on average in the neighborhood of 1% of a $400 monthly premium, that's $4.
Right. And so that's where each of the plans would be, and I'm not going to try to presuppose where they would fall on this. It depends if they have any Medi-Cal at all, whether a portion of that tax is paid through, and whether or not they have a lot of small group versus large group. And so again, the mitigating impact is if you have two competing plans in Sacramento, and one has some Medi-Cal business and the other does not, and they both are in the same, say they're the same in the enrollment size, and they're paying $750, per member per month in a tax. One plan will have a very different pass-through than another. And so I think that's where, if you're trying to kind of average it and say it's very, very small.
This is very helpful. So with regard to this tier structure that you have here, is there a way for us to know, or in your further negotiations with the plans, that we put it into real numbers, that if you were to pass it on to your premium payers, what would it mean in real dollars? Because if it's $4, $6, somewhere in that neighborhood, I think that's something we could explain to our constituents, as opposed to if it were a $50 or $100 a month increase, which is a very difficult thing to explain to our constituents. But if we're talking in single-digit dollars per month, and the alternative is we have to find $1.1 billion somewhere in our budget to cut to make up for it, that it puts it in more real terms for us to be able to understand ourselves and to describe to our constituents.
Yeah, we can work with the plans, but I will also defer to the plans when they come up to testify as to whether they can kind of come up with some of those estimates as well.
Thank you.
Yes,
thank you, Mr. Chair, for your generosity.
Thank you.